I wanted out of Erie, Pennsylvania. I was turning 17 and I didn't want to rot in Erie, Pennsylvania until I was 40 years old. I didn't know anything about Vietnam. That wasn't the point. The point was, I wasn't into a college scene. I wasn't into demonstrations. I wasn't into anything. Religious family. Grew up playing with dolls till I was 13 years old. It was still a very sheltered time for girls. My high school guidance counselor said to me, "Well now, sissy, what is it you want to be? A nurse, a teacher, or a secretary?" "Well, sir, a nurse, I guess. I'll help mankind." Now, my biggest problems my first year in nursing school were I had no self-control and I couldn't stand to see people in pain. But my instructor said to me, "You don't have a choice here. You just get in there and do as you're told." So there's this old man in a coma and I'm supposed to give him a shot of penicillin in his rear end. And now I'm really a wreck because I'm thinking, how can I cause this sick old man more pain? But I do it. And the guy immediately comes out of a coma and goes, "Oh my gosh, where am I?" And I think, oh gosh, I did a miracle. I can do anything. I'll join the army. I'll save the world.
I play Steely, who is a WAC, Women's Army Corps. And she's based on a real person. Doris I. Lucky is her nickname, Allen. And she was in intelligence. And she really was in Vietnam for 3 years. She was in the WACs for about 30 years. She won all kinds of awards and everything because she really did call the Tet Offensive before it happened, and nobody believed her because, you know, woman, black, 60s, nobody's going to believe what she said. And some other thing that she figured out ahead of time told them they didn't believe her. Then finally somebody's saying, "Hey, you know what, looks like she might know what she's talking about." And then they started believing her and acting on what she said. I would say it's about women who served in Vietnam in the WACs, the Red Cross, the USO, and the nurses and the Army. And the surprise is that they have no idea how many women served in the Army because they did not, or in any capacity, because they did not keep track of the women. And what the Army did was, after Vietnam, they just called everybody like a soldier or whatever, so they didn't do it by gender. So they have no idea how many women were there. And when I say no idea, it's like between 50 and 5,000. You know, they have no numbers at all. It's because women were not supposed to be in danger, and so when they got to Vietnam, everyone was in danger. There wasn't a front and a safe part. Everything was the front, every place, and so they couldn't have that known. And when I was doing some of the research, most of the cast members are, well, no, not most, all of the cast members are younger than I am. And so doing the research, it was more like remembering a lot of what was going on. And then I realized how today we don't see the news the way we used to see it. Like all the stuff that I'm seeing in the documentaries on Vietnam were stuff that I saw as a kid on TV. Like in the 60s, I remember we saw that little girl running with chemicals. We saw the guy shot in the head. And in Life magazine, they took it shot by shot by shot. Oh, no pun intended. But took it bit by bit, showing the gun, and they showed that. So I hadn't realized what we're not seeing nowadays. It's as if we're not seeing war. And at that time, we saw everything.
So I play a character named Sissy, and she's from small town, well, maybe not so small, but it's Erie, Pennsylvania, and coming from a religious family, has gone to nursing school, and I think seeks out something more exciting, more adventurous, so she turns towards going to the Vietnam War, and of course, being there is not at all what she expected.
I play Whitney, who is a Vassar grad, and is someone who, a little bit like Sissy, is trying to get out of her circumstances. Mm-hmm. She's going to be a boarding school teacher probably for the rest of her life and is trying to avoid that. And so she wants to spend a year abroad in service as a Red Cross nurse in Vietnam.
I mean, I think in some ways the typical career path for women was different. In Sissy's opening monologue, she says, you know, she goes to her guidance counselor and he says, well, what do you want to be, a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary? So I think these were more traditional job prospects for women. But, you know, I mean, that's still very much today. There's this expectation that women will be at home, or, teaching is a very much female-dominated field. So, you know, different, but still, there are still parallels.
But I think women and the experiences of women have probably stayed the same. I think women are complicated, complex human beings, just like their male counterparts. And I think this play does a really good job of showcasing how there are some similarities and also some differences in how they experienced war and the trauma that follows.
And that's what's nice about the play, too, is, you know, we start off and we see these women, I think, very hopeful and very optimistic of what this experience will bring for them. And then, I mean, for me personally with Sissy, I feel like it's not until she gets home when the trauma really sets in. You know, you have the experiences in combat as, you know, with the Tet Offensive, their first mass casualty, but then it's coming back, you see how shattered they are, and they haven't even fully realized that or begun to cope with that. So that to me is very compelling. Yes. So the play was adapted, I don't know if it adapted from, but drew inspiration from the book of the same title. And so some of the experiences, the quotations, are directly pulled from the book, A Piece of My Heart, which was a series of interviews with 26 women who served in Vietnam as nurses, USO singers and performers, Red Cross. We actually had a few people come in to help us as we were doing kind of the first stages of our work on this show. So we had a nurse who served in 70, and it was, I mean, that was very powerful. And to me, speaking with those people and the people who have lived through that, that was one of the most helpful moments of this whole process, the rehearsal process of creating these characters and finding their narratives.
Well, for me, what was really interesting, we had a man come in who was also a veteran, and he was wounded. So what was interesting for me that I learned were more of the specifics on how they treated a wound in a battlefield situation back then as opposed to now, and the surgeries and the methods that resulted in these sort of very, very, very permanent scars. And to sort of see that, he showed us his scar, and it was just this, I mean, it was a piece out of his arm, and it really sort of brought things home for me in a way that...
The permanent scars.
Yeah, that you don't get necessarily just by reading about it.
And the scars physically and mentally is something that the vet said that was really powerful for me. Was he said that he kind of has this constant rolling tape playing in his head of these views, these people, the land that was just completely butchered. And I mean, things that we could never even imagine, but just the tone in his voice and the expression on his face, you can just see how even going to that place and letting this tape play for a split second, how much that affected him. And that was very moving. I mean,
it was really...
Yeah.
That was a tough day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I play 7 different roles, but there is also sort of a convention that runs throughout the piece where even with just a subtle change of our tone and our attitude, it's clear, hopefully, that we are taking on a different persona. What I think is really kind of brilliant about the play is that the play does really get into the hearts and minds and emotions of the women primarily, but where sort of the balance to that in terms of, for instance, I play a father, a Gold Star father, who's there, who's his journey to the scene we see in the play is that he's lost his only son in Vietnam, and he's there to help the nurses. So it sort of rounds out the scene in that the nurses are coming back from Vietnam, and he's sort of made it his mission to help the nurses. At the same time, though, on the other side of the coin, I do play a lot of sort of generic military voices who are impediments to what the women really want as they're trying to both do their work in Vietnam and also reestablish a firm footing once they're back in the U.S. It is really challenging. I love it. What I like about it is that as an actor, it's really fun because you can kind of, and especially working with a director like Nora, who really encourages you to take risks and fail big. You know, I mean, and the only way you know if a character is going to land is to sort of throw it all out there. And then over the course of rehearsal, sort of whittle it down so that it's very clear what the characteristics of that character are, so that the audience isn't necessarily confused by too much. So they get a sense of the character, but it's, especially in a piece like this, that it's clear what the function of that character is in the scene to sort of balance out the women. I think overall, my favorite scene in the play is when we're all on the airplane together, flying to Vietnam. All of our characters are together. And I think the reason I like that scene is, first off, we are, as an ensemble, all in the scene, but also there's a sense, I think, of the journey that all of the characters take over the course of the play that really is set up in that flight from the U.S. to Vietnam really early on. And I think that, much like playing all the mix of different characters, what's great about a set like this is that it can be anything that we want it to be. It can be an airplane. It can be the barracks of where the Army nurses are living. It can also be a USO show. And that's what's really brilliant about what our set designer, Janie Howland, has put together for us, is that you really get a sense of what the obviously the setting of the memorial and how much impact that has, but it also allows us as actors and our director, a very creative director like Nora, to really make each specific area of the stage a specific place. And so what's great about a set like this is it lets the imagination run wild.
And here they are! The sugar